My name is Jeff, and this story is about one of the first times that my parents left me home alone. I was probably 12 or 13 at the time. I would be left on my own from around the age of 10. I guess that's a little young for most, but that's what we did. My mom would always tell me not to answer the door or phone when I was alone. However, I would break the rules sometimes. Usually just to answer the phone, because if it was one of my friends, then I didn't want to miss out. My father was away on business at the time, and my mom was out doing something. I can't remember what. It was about 8 p.m., and I was in the living room watching TV. Then I heard the doorbell ring. I ignored it at first, and continued watching. Then it rang again. I got up and walked to the front of the house. I wasn't going to answer it. I was just curious, and I thought I could peek out the window and see who it was. I carefully moved the curtains aside and pressed my face against the glass. He was a middle-aged man in some kind of uniform. He looked like a mechanic or some kind of repairman. He wore a blue-collared shirt and a name tag, but I couldn't read it. I was watching him for a few seconds when he looked over at me. I was caught. He smiled and waved at me, then said, "Hey there, son. We got a report of a gas leak. Can you let me in?" I quickly closed the curtains and took a step away from the window. I knew that I wasn't supposed to open the door when I was alone, but if there was a gas leak, then that could be bad. I reluctantly turned the deadbolt and opened the door. The man was really quite friendly and jovial. He told me that he needed to come in to check the gas lines. I told him that I'm not supposed to be alone with strangers, and he asked me if he could talk to my mom or dad. That was when a chill ran down my spine. I realized that if I admitted to being alone, then he could do whatever he wanted. He was probably fishing for information as soon as I opened the door. I tried to think of a lie, but the best I could come up with was to say that my dad was in the shower. That would only buy me a few minutes. Tension built while we stood there, pretending that everything was all right. I almost started crying at one point. Then I saw one of my neighbors across the street walking her dog. She immediately noticed me standing there on the porch with a strange man and must have known that something was wrong. As soon as the man saw her coming, he turned around and walked back to his van, then drove off. My neighbor asked me who that was. I told her what had happened and that he was with the gas company and that there was a leak. Then she calmly told me to stay in the house while she called my mom. My mom rushed home, and when she heard what happened, she called the police. It was then that I realized how serious the situation was. We never found out who that guy was, but when my mom called the gas company, they said they hadn't sent anyone and that there was no leak. I'm a 27-year-old woman, and I used to live in a shared house with a few of my friends from college. It had been about 5 years since we graduated, but we all managed to find work in the same city, so we decided to move in together. This story took place during Thanksgiving of last year. My roommates had all gone to spend the occasion with their families. I, however, don't have the best relationship with my parents, so I stayed and had the house to myself. Besides, there was a work event that I wanted to go to, just a little get-together at a local bar. We had a few drinks and talked about work for a while, and after 2 hours, I decided to call it a night early. I decided that I'd rather watch some Netflix and go to sleep at a reasonable hour. I called an Uber and stood on the sidewalk waiting. The car pulled up and I got in, taking the back seat. The driver was about 45 years old with a bald head. He was very friendly and talkative, and although I didn't really feel like talking, I didn't want to be rude. He asked me some mundane questions about what I was up to that night. I told him that I was out with my coworkers and that my roommates were away for Thanksgiving. He laughed awkwardly, then said, "So you're home alone?" Then he looked back at me with a smile. I immediately got a feeling in the pit of my stomach when I realized what I had done. I should have never told a stranger that I was home alone, especially because I had already given him my address. I tried not to dwell on it though. He was probably harmless, I thought. We eventually made it to my house, and I got out of the car. I walked to my front door and stepped inside. Once I locked the front door, I peered out the window and breathed a sigh of relief when I saw the car drive away. I went to my room and got into bed. I was watching something on my laptop when I heard a noise from downstairs. It was a long creaking sound, like somebody was opening a door really slowly. My stomach turned when I realized that I couldn't remember if I had locked the back door. I didn't even check. I quickly closed my laptop and placed it on my nightstand. Then I walked to my door and stood there listening. At this point, I wasn't sure if there was anyone in the house, so I wanted to make sure before calling the police. With my ear firmly pressed against the door, I could hear the faint sound of footsteps coming from downstairs. Someone was in the house. I almost panicked, but somehow managed to stay in control. I moved my dresser in front of the door, but when I did, the footsteps became louder and quicker. Now I realized that doing so revealed my location in the house. He was coming for me. I ran into my closet and dialed 911. Whispering into the phone, the operator told me to stay calm and that the police would be there in 5 minutes. 5 minutes sounded like an eternity, but I knew I could make it. Just then, I started to hear pounding on my bedroom door. Neither of us said a word, but the door was opening. The dresser wouldn't hold him for long. Then I shouted out that the police were on their way. I guess that was enough to scare him, and he stopped trying to get in. That was when the sweet sound of police sirens emerged from the distance. A few long minutes later, a female officer knocked on my door and said that it was safe to come out. She told me that they had arrested the guy and had him in custody. I then told her about the creepy experience I had with the Uber driver earlier in the evening. It was then that we walked out to the street. I saw my tormentor sitting there in the back of a police car. It was him, my Uber driver from that night. I have no idea what would have happened if I hadn't heard the door opening that evening. What if I had gone to sleep earlier? Either way, this was the most terrifying experience of my life, and if you're ever home alone, whatever you do, don't tell a stranger. When I was growing up, my mom used to work the late shifts as a nurse at a retirement home. Her shifts would start at 6 p.m. and go until 2 a.m. She used to get a babysitter for my brother Andrew and I, but as soon as we were old enough, we would be on our own. That was fine with us because we felt really mature and grown up having the house to ourselves. Neither my brother nor I were really troublemakers by anybody's standards, and we were actually pretty good students. We'd get our homework done on our own, then usually just watch TV and hang out afterwards. We were sitting on the couch in front of the TV. Our living room was at the front of the house, and there was a window next to the TV, so we could see the street and sidewalk out of our peripheral vision while we watched. It was a quiet night, but there were a few cars passing by, and also 1 or 2 people walking down the street. I eventually started to notice something strange. I had seen the same van pass our window at least 3 times. It was an older gray minivan, probably from the late 90s. I turned my attention away from the TV and started watching the street more closely. After I saw it another time, I told my brother. He hadn't noticed because he was focused on the show. The both of us sat there, looking out the window, and sure enough, we saw the same van another 2 times within 3 minutes. This guy was just driving back and forth on our street. It seemed strange, but we didn't worry too much at first, because maybe he was lost. We noticed it pass by another few times, and started to get concerned. Both of us were now fixated on the window, but after another few minutes, it seemed to stop. We were both relieved and went back to the TV. After a few episodes of whatever we were watching, it was starting to get late, and my brother and I decided to go to bed. Andrew went upstairs, while I got up from the couch and walked past the window. That's when I noticed something terrifying. That old van was parked in front of our house on the street, just out of view of where we were sitting. I quickly closed the curtains, then slid them open a crack to peek through. There was a man sitting in the front seat of the van. Had he just been sitting there this whole time? I thought. I couldn't really make out any details about him, but one thing did strike me. His eyes had a seriously disturbing look. The reflection of the bright streetlights gave them an evil, yellowish glow. I don't think he saw me behind the curtains, but he was definitely looking at our house. I called up to Andrew and told him to come downstairs. He looked out the window to see the man sitting there in the driver's seat of the van. "I think he saw me," my brother cried. We were terrified, and after some discussion, we decided to call our mom at work. My brother and I took pride in being able to take care of ourselves, so we didn't like to bother Mom at work, but this was serious. As soon as we told her what was happening, she raced home. Less than 15 minutes later, I watched her car pull into the driveway. I then turned my attention to the spot where I saw the van, and it was gone. He had taken off. Probably as soon as my mom got home. We never found out who that guy was or why he was there. My mom did call the police, but there was really nothing they could do. We didn't even get a license plate number. This incident shook all three of us to the core, and for another year or so after, my mom started getting a babysitter again.